Warren Gefeller, Russell.
Emmerich Cross, Kansas City.
Okay. Sheila Camus, commission support.
Brad Lovelace, secretary from Topeka.
Mike Miller, assistant secretary, and Pratt.
Chris Timison, legal counsel.
Okay. To start with, we're going to have an opportunity for general public comment on non-agenda items. Are there any hands up or hands coming up, Jason?
Not at this point. If you have a general comment and you want to comment, use the hand up
see a
feature.
hand
It
up.
looks like Bryce has used it now. So Bryce, I'll get you unmuted here.
Hello.
Hi, Bryce. We can
Good
hear
evening,
you.
folks. How are you guys this evening? My question is, I know you guys were talking about the fishing within 50 up at state lakes around boat docks and slips and stuff like that. My biggest concern, I guess it's really not a concern, but there's great opportunity for not only me as a angler, but also for young children to fish around those, especially out of a boat if you're in a boat. I understand with valuing people's property and being respectful and that sort, but the way that the marina owner up there has been towards a lot of other people besides me, I've had several issues with them, but I know I'm not the only one, which I can understand him being upset if people are throwing into individual boats and damaging property. But when he comes out and basically disrespects the aspect of us fishing and act like he owns everything, it's kind of an issue to me. I know that there's a good opportunity for him to make money off of multiple individuals if he would treat people right. But I guess my main question would be, what in the future, or is there anything going to be done with him having posted signs around that area?
Okay, we discussed this earlier in the afternoon. If there's no other public comment on this subject, I may have Secretary Lovelace sort of reiterate what he said earlier today. But before he says anything, is there any other public comment on this subject?
Not seeing anything right now.
Okay, Brad, you want to just kind of give Bryce the benefit of what you said this afternoon?
Sure. Brad Lovelace, thank you, Chairman Lauber. So the situation at our marinas is we have a feature of each marina contract that says they can exclude others from 50 feet away from the structures that they own. So that's part of their contract. But what we see across the state is different marine operators manage that differently. And we've talked with a lot, our parks folks are talking with marina operators every week, and this has not been a problem around the state, but is an issue at Milford. And so Linda Linderman, the director of the Parks Division, and I were up there last week, and we were visiting with the owners, and we talked about solutions going forward and had a productive conversation. And we're all optimistic that we're working toward a solution up there. I can't really offer you any details, but because we know that this does work around the state constructively, and these retail operators are able to navigate this, we're confident that things will be adjusted at Milford to allow some lowering of the tensions there, which everybody wants, including the marine operators. And so we are working towards some solutions there. They are within their rights to tell people to stay away. But we hope to come up with a compromise in the future that will allow, folks to get along and have a harmonious relationship there like we have it most everywhere else in this. So importantly, there's no vote tonight on the agenda, but the conversation, your inputs appreciated as Commissioner Lauber always points out. So that's kind of where we stand right now. We are optimistic going forward, and we ask you to have a little bit more patience to work with us as we work with them for a productive solution.
Okay, is there any other public comment on non-agenda items? Is there any commissioner comment on non-agenda items? Well, hearing none, let's go into the agenda. Rich Schultes is going to talk about elk and antelope, not in that order.
This is Rich Schultes, Wildlife Research Supervisor at the Emporia office, and I have two regulations for consideration tonight in public hearing. First one is 11525-7. This regulation pertains to seasons, bag limits, and permits for pronghorn antelope in the state of Kansas. Unit boundaries are defined in 115.4-6. Units 2, 17, and 18 are those open to hunting. The proposed season dates for archery, September 18th through the 26th and October 9th through the 31st. Permits are valid in all units for that archery season and are unlimited and available to both residents and non-residents. For firearms season, proposed dates are October 1st through the 4th. Permits are limited to residents only. And the proposal is for 88 permits in Unit 2, 32 permits in Unit 17, and 6 permits in Unit 18, and that's for the firearm season. And finally, for muzzleloader, the proposed season dates are September 27th through October 4th, also limited to residents only. And for quota, the permits are 24 for Unit 2, 8 for Unit 17, and 4 for Unit 18. And I will note, Matt mentioned that is about a 20% reduction of the permit quota we've had in previous years, given to mediocre to poor production in those regions of the state the last number of years. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions you might have.
Unit 17 is the largest of the units, but Unit 2 is the one that has the most permits and presumably the most antelope.
Yeah, I was just pulling up the map here and see if I could get it real quick, but I believe that is correct, Chairman Lauber.
Okay, is there any questions for Rich on this? This is pretty much in line with what we've dealt with before.
Yeah. Just a quick question. Are we filling those permits, Rich?
I'm sorry, what was the
Are we
question?
filling all those permits?
As far as success, yeah, they're all being filled, but as far as success, depends on the year, of course, the success rates for those things. But yes, they're all being used every year, if that's the question, if we're selling all those for sure.
I think it takes almost a half a dozen preference points to be able to draw one, as I've been told. I believe that's a number. Well, if there's no discussion from the public or the commission about this, this is something we need to vote on. I'd like a motion that it be, I'd like somebody to make a motion that we approve this as presented.
Move.
Can I have a second?
Commissioner Sill, I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve 115-25-7. Is there any discussion? Discussion from the public? And Sheila, you want to call a roll?
Commissioner Sporer,
Yes.
No. Commissioner Sill,
yes,
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 6-0.
All right, Rich, talk
Yes,
about
sir.
it.
Yep, second regulation is 115.25-8. And that would be the regulation pertains to season bag limits, unit boundaries, permits, and tags for elk hunting. And just to start out here with a general summary, this recommendation is consistent that what we've had the last number of years. I'll just run through some of the information there about seasons and everything, but boundaries are defined in 115.4-6B, units 2 and 3 open to hunting. Proposed archery season dates would be September 13th through December 31st in units 2 and 3 outside of Fort Riley, September 1st through the 30th on Fort Riley, which is referred to as subunit 2A. The proposed firearm season dates off Fort Riley, October 1st through the 31st, and then December 1st through the 12th, as well as January 1st through March 15th of 2022. And then on Fort Riley, October 1st through December 31st, with the month of October being the first segment, November being the second, and third being December. Proposed muzzleloader season dates, both in on and off Fort Riley, are September 1st through the 30th. The limited quota, either sex elk permits are valid during any open season, and we're proposing 12 to be authorized for the coming season. The limited quota antlerless elk permits are valid during any open season, except that only 1/3 are valid during each of those 3 one-month segments I referred to on Fort Riley. And we are proposing that 6 of those antlerless elk permits be allocated for each segment. Elk permits will be available only to Kansas residents, and a limited quota permit application will be separated by military and non-military applicants. Unlimited number of hunt your own land, antlerless only, and either sex elk permits will be authorized in units 2 and 3. And an unlimited number of general resident and landowner tenant, antlerless only, and any elk permits will be authorized in unit 3. And just one note that we're still collecting harvest data from the previous season that ended on March 5th. But we did note that we had the highest permit sales that we've ever had in the last season. So there are folks taking advantage of the opportunity that presents itself outside of Fort Riley area in different parts of the state. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Rich? Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion?
Commissioner Sill, I'll move to accept as presented.
Commissioner Spore, I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion from the commission or the public? Okay, Sheila, call the roll.
Commissioner Spore,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes,
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 6-0.
Okay, now Jeff, there you are. You're going to talk about and hares.
Yep, Jeff Prendergast, small game specialist, Hayes, Kansas. Tonight I have 3 regulations for consideration. The first is KR 115-3-2. This deals with the legal take and equipment for small game. In this regulation, staff is recommending to include hares to allow box traps as a legal method of take for hares to make rabbits and hares consistent.
Does anybody have any questions for Jeff on this one? Then I'd like a motion.
Motion to approve. Cross.
Commissioner Ryder, second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Sheila?
Commissioner Spore,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
yes,
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 6-0.
Okay, Jeff.
Okay, the other two that we have tonight are KR 115-25-2 and KR 115-25-3. This is bag limits, possession limits of rabbits and of hares, and staff is recommending to increase the possession limit to 4 times the daily bag to be consistent across all small game species.
Any questions?
Hey, Jeff, we had a couple of people get on last time. Was there any more that came out of that discussion? I know you were going to talk to them, later on. Was there any more that you can elaborate on and talk about their concerns and whether this has anything to kind of do with what they have been seeing?
So
Commissioner Ryder, sorry.
in the discussions that we have, some of it seems to be some of that. I believe some of what they're dealing with is perception issues. Some of it is localized issues there. As far as I discussed it with them, that if the commission was interested in looking into bag limits, the bag limits would be a better way of addressing, I think, their concerns and possession limits. I would rather see the possession limit go to 4 times. And then if we're wanting to restrict harvest, to then address that with a reduced bag limit, that would reduce the possession limit then, because it would still be 4 times whatever the new bag limit is. But I started to pull in information for that for a bigger conversation, but the decision was to go forward with the 4 times daily, 4 times possession limit currently. And then if we want to revisit other regulations later, then we can come back and do that.
Okay, so Commissioner Ryder again. So you're going to be talking with your group, and you probably already kind of do that, but going to address that through the course of this next year.
Yeah, I can bring forward some general information on how seasons are set and how we compare and stuff, and to discuss what potential steps that we could take one way or the other.
Commissioner Ryder, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Jeff? Can I have a motion?
Commissioner Gefeller, move.
Commissioner Sill, second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Chris Tymason, I want to be clear that we have to vote on these individually. So the motion was for, if we could revisit that.
The motion.
The motion was for 115-25-2.
Yes.
For bag limit of 4 times the daily possession. And I agree that if we need to reduce harvest, I think having a reduced daily bag limit makes more sense.
I'll still second.
Any additional discussion? Okay, Sheila?
Commissioner Sporer,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 6-0.
Okay, now we have one more. And this is 115-25-3. Now, that's already been discussed by Jeff, but it's a separate motion that we make.
Yeah, so this would be the possession limit on hares or jackrabbits. So to go as well 4 times the daily bag.
Can I have a motion for approval?
I'd move that one as well, Commissioner Gefeller.
Commissioner Sill, second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, Sheila?
Commissioner Sporer,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gfeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 6-0.
All right. Next up is Linda's going to discuss KAR 115-9-6 of vehicle permits.
That's correct. Linda Lanterman and Pratt. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. We are voting on tonight for our electronic kiosks to go in our state parks. We're receiving 26 of them through our reservation company. This will help us take cash out of the field and use a credit card. They are ADA accessible. And we have not received them yet, but we would like to. And we need your support on this. Any questions?
Commissioner Spore, when do you think you'll receive the machines?
We should be receiving them within the next 6 weeks.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? If not, can I have a motion?
Commissioner Spore, I move.
I'll second that. Cross.
It's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Sheila?
Commissioner Spore,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gfeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 6-0.
Okay, I think we're ready for Tom. Waterfowl season.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and viewing public. I do have a short presentation for this evening. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service develops frameworks that establish maximum bag and possession limits, season lengths, and earliest opening dates for waterfowl hunting seasons. States must operate within these frameworks when establishing state-specific migratory game bird seasons. A briefing item was prepared in the commission packet regarding the development of Kansas's 2021-22 waterfowl seasons, including on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service season frameworks, pertinent background materials, and staff recommendations for the 2021-2022 waterfowl seasons. The setting of waterfowl seasons is a biopolitical process, balancing not only biotic factors, but also social implications. Kansas seasons cover a variety of species and habitats, which are just as diverse as its hunting community. In developing staff recommendations, we attempt to align season dates that allow the greatest opportunity for all Kansas hunters. Recommendations are derived with considerations to waterfowl traditions, timing of migrations, times of high harvest, and hunter participation, and incorporating hunter feedback. With stabilized federal frameworks over the past 25 years, Kansas Wildlife Parks and Tourism is striving to establish consistency in our season selection process. We'll start off with September teal. Staff recommendation is similar to previous years, with a 9-day teal season in the High Plains unit beginning the third Saturday of September, and a 16-day season for the Low Plains zones beginning the second Saturday of September. The difference in days is due by the High Plains and Low Plains is due to the 23 additional days afforded during the general duck seasons of the High Plains unit and the 107-day seasons of the restriction of the Migratory Treaty Act. Youth seasons, similar to previous recommendations. Sorry, I'm off the slide here. So staff is for youth season, staff is recommending similar to past changing 2 requirements for youth hunting days for seasons. The first one is raising the age from 15 to those under 18. And staff is recommending removing restrictions that adults accompanying youth on youth waterfowl hunting days must possess license and stamps required by law to hunt waterfowl. In 2021 was the inaugural year for veterans and active military waterfowl hunting days. Youth, veteran, and active military waterfowl hunting days are a passion topic and one KWPT has received several comments regarding. Youth participation remains relatively low since its inception, despite promotional efforts. There is greater participation from veterans and active military, albeit there are still at small percentages of Kansas waterfowl hunting community. Both groups are important to the R3 efforts and to continue Kansas waterfowl hunting heritage. We have received concerns from youth participants regarding that pairing the days took away from the youth hunting experience. We've also received positive feedbacks from veterans and active military and other groups. Many not only expressed their appreciation for the additional hunting opportunities, but their pairing days enhance family and mentoring opportunities. And most of the complaints originated from a few wildlife areas. Several options to lessen these concerns were considered. The unpairing of days was one. However, this would add the season setting complexity, which would impact the entire waterfowl hunting community. As the Migratory Bird Treaty Act limits seasons for any given one species to 107 days, if veterans and active military days were decoupled, 2 additional hunting days would have to be removed from Canada goose, light goose seasons, as well as the High Plains unit and extended falconry seasons. Also, it could affect the timing of teal seasons, the early duck zone, and High Plains duck opener. It also would add additional hunting pressure prior to those opening days. Veterans and active military could be held during a split or post seasons, but hearing from veterans advocacy groups, this may not be as suitable for those with impairments. Limiting veterans and active military days to this Sunday of the youth weekend would be one compromise. It's downhill side, it would be limiting opportunities on private land and public areas that are not having problems with overlapping user groups. The reduction of hunting opportunities, as well as having only 1 year experience, to support staff recommendations. It is important that KWPT continue to monitor any season conflicts and, if needed, make appropriate for future season alterations. As the coupling of these seasons place an additional hunting pressure for certain wildlife areas, it's essential to work with public land managers to mitigate these conflicts, as well as continue gathering hunter feedback. Kansas is one of the 5 Central Flyway states that offer veteran military days and which are all held simultaneously. As mentioned previously, staff is incorporating tools of structured decision-making to assist in removing bias and stabilizing season date selections. In this approach, the recommendation for opening day for the Southeast Zone is the Saturday closest November 8th. In the review of migration patterns, harvest, hunter activity, habitat conditions, weather patterns, holidays, and other variables for that region, the Saturday to closest November 8th provides the best long-term opportunity. It provides both a balance of November and January hunting days. It also allows to always be able to catch the Veterans Holiday weekend. Staff recommendations for goose seasons are similar to past seasons. Staff continues to recommend a 6 Canada goose daily bag limit. While still 2 less than the maximum allowed by federal frameworks, the 6 goose daily bag limit is instrumental in managing resident Canada goose populations in Kansas, as well as the Central Flyway at tolerable levels. A daily bag limit of 6 Canada geese was also the overwhelming preference of Kansas waterfowl hunters in the 2019 waterfowl hunter survey. Consistent with past seasons, staff are recommending a 15-day falconry season in Kansas low plains zones. Due to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act 107-day restrictions, it does not allow for any hawking days in the High Plains unit. With that, I'll gladly take any questions.
Commissioner Ryder, just a couple of questions concerning adults during the youth season. Will those adults still need a federal duck stamp, or do they need a duck stamp currently? And would they need one moving forward?
They would not use it if they're supervising a youth for that season.
And one other question, Commissioner Ryder again. For youth and veteran days, is that only for Kansas residents, or could somebody, an active military from a different state come and hunt during that season here in Kansas?
As presented, it is for all hunters, resident and non-residents. If we do see additional hunting pressure, could be one option to make it a resident-only season, but currently it is for all hunters.
Commissioner Spoor, Tom, what's the non-resident number that's taking advantage of the youth veterans hunting weekend?
It is still relatively small. did have a few on some of our public management areas, like at Cheyenne Bottoms that are destinations, but it's still, I think only about 11% of the hunters would actually probably would likely qualify to participate in Youth Veterans Day, but it's not an overwhelming number of non-residents coming in.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sill, I have two questions. If I understood correctly at the last meeting, you have a list of documents that the federal government accepts as proof of military service. Is that accurate? Or how difficult is it for a veteran to prove service?
Sure. There is a number of documents, and I do believe I shared that with you through email after the meeting, or I can, we'll send again if you permit. There's probably 8 or more documents that was listed that would prove them as a veteran or active military. And I can read them off to you if you'd like.
No, that's okay. I don't need it, but someone else may hear if they speak up. My second question is, what was the R3 input on the controversy over the pressure, and what input did our R3 staff have on this issue?
So, like some of the mentoring groups, like Pass On Outdoors, they were supported to have it, as well as some of the things, some of the military groups, like the ones that have at Jamestown, that were able to incorporate mentor hunts for their new veterans or new active military hunting, as well as youth, to be able to combine those events as one. So I think from some of the groups we heard were pretty positive. It was kind of more from the individuals that we heard from that.
What about our R3 staff? Were they included in that conversation, or is there a chance to hear what their input is? Because in one sense, it feels a little like we're recommending no changes in something where there's some controversy that directly affects the work they do, and you want to be working together, not against each other.
Sure. I don't think we had an official comment from them, but I'll let Brad, or if we do have an R3 coordinator on here.
Good evening. So we do have some R3 staff. Jessica Mounts is the director over that division. So Jessica, you want to jump in?
Sure. Thank you. Sorry for stepping on you. Jessica Mounts, Director of Licensing and Education. Yeah, we would welcome that conversation, Commissioner Sill. So I'm happy to have that discussion.
Okay. So there hasn't been a huge involvement with you guys in that department on this particular season or issue at present then?
No, not at present, but we're happy to have that conversation and support it.
Unless I'm mistaken, though, in an effort to deal with some of these issues, didn't we make some of the public waterfowl areas youth only? To where it would kind of eliminate the crossover and the congestion. That's not exactly the same, but what Commissioner Sill is referring to is there was a lot of youth hunters and their mentors felt they were being squeezed out by veterans. And I think what an effort was made to create some youth only areas to eliminate that congestion.
Sure. There's a number of our public waterfowl areas that already have youth only areas. At Cheyenne Bottoms last year, they opened up one of the refuge areas as youth only for a large Pass It On event. And I think the recommendations coming from Stuart at the next meeting will again have some of those more designated youth waterfowl hunting areas.
Commissioner Lauber.
Yes.
Stuart Schrog, Public Lands, if I can just add a few words. Jessica Mounts and I have had a discussion about where we can maybe do better on the R3 standpoint. I think we do have some waterfowl areas that have designated youth pools, youth only pools or not, but still are seeing a lack of youth participation. So I feel like that's where R3 can and us can really work together in trying to improve participation during that youth season at many of our public waterfowl areas. So that conversation will for sure continue. And yeah, Commissioner, you are correct. McPherson Wetlands, we decided we were going to designate the big basin units for youth only for the upcoming season, as well as an additional unit at Cheyenne Bottoms for youth only for that special season. So we are taking measures to try to counteract some of those conflicts, but we'll continue to have those conversations and include the R3 effort in that as well.
Okay, any other discussion? Any questions for Tom?
So Commissioner Ryder, we don't see that at this point that it would be beneficial to eliminate out-of-staters during the youth season and veteran season at this point. I'm just looking for ways that we could quickly, or for this season at least, alleviate some of those concerns that we've had. And I missed that part of the meeting, unfortunately, today. So maybe you guys discussed that and I missed it. I apologize.
Sure. So when staff recommendations came in March, we were still in the initial phases or beginning phases of looking at the non-resident issue, and kind of wanted to wrap up that as part of the non-resident issue rather than our season selection process.
The non-resident issue has had some, has been addressed moderately and is going to continue to be discussed as we get more and more information. So while we've made some changes, there will probably be more coming down the pike. What I'd like to do today, though, is I agree with Tom. I would like to go ahead and set these seasons. And I'm going to propose that somebody make a motion that we accept staff recommendations.
Commissioner Lauber, I've got a couple statements. I guess I'm still stuck on the poor quality of the hunting on public lands, and I'm probably not going to get over it. We talk about R3 and trying to improve participation with the youth. And if we don't have quality hunting, they're probably not going to come. And I guess in one effort to try to stop the curve of the lack of quality hunting, I'm proposing that we only able to shoot 4 Canada geese this coming year rather than 6. And I got lots of emails from lots of people that were talking about non-resident guide services that are coming to the area. They're hunting public and private land, mostly private land. I guess I can't say they're on public land. I don't know that, but they're setting up, they're shooting all the geese, they're staying daylight to dark, and then they just go to the next area. And I guess that's one small token that I would have, is I would like to get the Canadian geese to 4. I haven't talked to any residents that said that they didn't think that was a good idea. Thank you.
Tom, what do you think of that?
So, we have asked that question in 2 prior resident waterfowl hunter surveys in 2014, 2019. Just overwhelmingly, the 6 goose bag limit is what comes up as a hunter's preference. And those are serving 12,000 resident hunters for those results. It also is very important to maintaining our resident goose population. We do that through hunter harvest is our primary means. So it's we're one of 2 states that have a restricted bag limit. It could be at 8, we're at 6. Nebraska's at 5. All the other states are at 8. It's kind of gets to be a hunter preference things when you start going as far as 6 or above, as far as its effect on harvest. But it'd be a hard recommendation looking at recent hunter survey data on that. One thing, the guide services would probably actually enjoy a smaller bag limit because that means they can get in and out of the fields quicker. Their hunters can reach their, goal or objective of a bag limit quicker. So I don't see how that would cure our commercial guiding services increases.
Yeah, Commissioner Spore, I guess to counter that, I guess I'm just trying to increase the quality of the hunt. I'm trying to make it last longer than it normally does. And I didn't get any of these negative emails about the limit until this year, which is 2020. So I would assume that the survey, this coming year would show some signs that there is over harvesting of Canadas in Kansas.
As far, it is kind of, most of our goose hunting is predominantly, or goose harvest is private lands. Most of it's field hunting, a little bit of some water hunting on some of our reservoirs and some of our larger public waterfowl areas.
I don't think I think Troy's point is to try to eliminate, to de-incentivize non-residents, but I don't think our dark geese population is being overhunted. It seems to be growing consistently, and particularly in the eastern part of the state. So I don't know whether that's going to solve. I don't think we're overhunting the dark goose population. I think we're trying to use that to accomplish reducing the volume of non-residents. And I was kind of hoping that we could deal with that through the committee and through the group that Stuart's dealing with. And then we have an issue with some of this takes place on federal reservoirs, and there's a limited amount we can do on that. So while I see your point, Troy, and I get similar emails, I think the motion that I would like to have before us today is strictly seasons and bag limits, and I don't see a compelling reason to change that.
Commissioner Ryder, Commissioner Spore, you're looking at quality of hunt. You're seeing that in your area as what's that's taken a nosedive, I guess, within the last year or so in particular, maybe since these surveys.
Yes, I just have had lots of people comment, and then I did some goose hunting this past year, and we just, the people that I was surrounded by and the people that communicated with me all, made the comment that 6 Canadas is an awful lot of geese. And they felt like that they could, make their season last longer. We only have so many geese. It doesn't matter what area you're in. They come and they go, and you only have so many geese. And if you shoot them all or put enough pressure on them, you don't have a hunt the next week or the week after that. But if you conserve your limit and only shoot 4, maybe you can have a couple more hunts, throughout the rest of the season. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. Instead of going out and let's shoot all our local geese, let's prolong it and allow it to happen more times and have a more quality of hunt.
Commissioner Ryder, so you're having some trouble with guide services, or is this just a private average Joe?
No, this is just no, Commissioner Spore. This is just merely me talking about what problems I'm seeing out in the field.
Commissioner Sill, there's been a high volume of, I went back in my email and looked, there's been a high volume of complaints about pressure, particularly public wildlife areas, since October was when those emails started coming in. Thus far, we're looking at no changes. This is like a patient that's bleeding and needs surgery, but you have to stop the bleeding before you can do surgery. I do not want to make knee-jerk reactions that have unintended consequences. But putting off any decisions for a whole nother year is going to continue to have the same effect that we're seeing in deer, where non-residents are decreasing. If I remember testimony earlier in the year, it was 13,000 resident deer hunters we've lost in the last 5 years. If I did my math right, we've lost 36,000 deer permit sales. And one of the biggest complaints is too many non-residents. This is mirroring that same thing, and we haven't made any major changes. And the problem is continuing. And I do not want to see us bleed out waiting to do surgery and make major changes that might need to happen. But we need to do some things now to help stop the bleeding. Not major huge things, but we've got to take some steps.
Well, I think that
To stop the bleeding now. I think Troy, whether it's bag limits on geese, Troy has a valid thing that the quality of the hunt's going down, where your data already shows we're losing resident hunters. We need to do something to take some steps while we prepare to make larger changes.
Well, that's what I thought that we had done with some of the public land rules, was try to eliminate some of the complaints with motors, wake, trying to have people get in. That didn't solve all the complaints, but it's something that we've been able to do for that will go into effect this season. I kind of hate to go a whole lot stronger until we have a little more than 1 year of what may be just anecdotal statistics. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Lauber. This is Brad Lovelace. Just so we clarify, Commissioner Sill, I know it's clear that our non-resident deer permit sales are going down. I was thinking that our waterfowl data showed a different trend. So Stuart, could you reference back to your data, at least from your memory? And are we seeing a long-term decline in resident waterfowl participation or not? Or Tom, looks like Tom might have that.
So resident numbers have been relatively flat. The non-resident numbers are steadily increasing from around 20% 10 years ago to getting close to about 38% now. I'm getting a number of complaints, both on public lands for ducks, and then for geese, particularly this year on geese, but we're on private lands. I think part of the issue there is the commercialization of wildlife and access, that people are getting pushed off lands. And I don't see that's a solvable problem through bag limits as much as looking at what we can do as far as more access and maybe some limitations on guiding or kind of restructuring our guiding services.
Thank you, Tom.
Commissioner Spohr, I guess I'm going to make this statement, and I'm going to tell you that non-resident guide services are going to change the footprint of hunting in Kansas. When you're hunting for profit, it changes the game and it changes how you play. And it's not the direction that we want to go. And left unchecked, if we don't somehow start regulating non-resident guide services, I think we're going to be reacting to a bigger problem. And my effort to go to 4 geese is just one small step in starting to get ahead of a problem that we are going to face.
Well, we're already facing that problem with deer hunting, and there's really not a lot we can do about it. I mean, it's a lot worse in deer hunting than it is in waterfowl hunting. And Lauren's point about Unit 16, I mean, it's basically froze out. And we have to fight every year to keep the legislature from giving the guides more clout with special interests that want transferable tags, and want other things that they think. I mean, I have no soft spot in my heart at all for guides, but I don't know how we could stop that other than have aggressive prosecution of guiding on public lands, which I think occurs all the time. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Brad Lovelace. Commissioner Sporer, we recognize that we don't have a good understanding and don't have any control over, besides normal regulations, over guides, resident or non-resident. So what we've initiated is a conversation. We don't really have a good way to contact the non-residents, but we've already started those conversations with resident guides to start to have a dialogue to understand, because we think they'll have a lot of insight into the issue you're talking about. And so we're trying to, we'll meet with them and try to understand how they perceive the situation and try to get their best input. Ultimately, it seems healthiest if they can be guides in general can be regulated to some degree. We know the good guides, the ones that you all are probably familiar with, like the idea of being regulated. They like the idea of setting a high standard and making sure fly-by-night people who give them a bad name can't operate. And so we're going to have those conversations, see what they say. So even if the legislature says we don't want the agency to regulate them, maybe they can come up with their own kind of certification or something to start down this path, because you're right. We just don't have any real control over them and really no information on how they operate. And so we feel like we're deficient too. So we're heading down that road with you.
Yeah, then the more and the deeper we look, the more recoil we're going to probably have from what we see. But Warren?
Yeah, I need a little help specific to this question. I mean, my understanding of the problem we discussed earlier and with guide services in state and out of state had to do with public lands and overcrowding on the public lands. And I guess, Troy, I'm having a little trouble understanding how reducing the bag limit would deal with that, unless you're saying that out-of-state hunters will just choose not to come to hunt because we have a low bag limit. Is that, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, Commissioner Sporer. Yeah, one of two things. They would either choose not to come, or when they did come, they could only shoot 4 geese. And maybe some young kid that gets a chance to shoot a goose can shoot a couple. But particularly, I've had personal experience with non-resident commercial waterfowl outfits. They came in behind a piece of property they own, and they hunted a half section of property that the landowner allows anybody and everybody to hunt. They came in and hunted it 14 days in a row, brought clients in after clients after clients, and hunted the same piece of property for 14 days. And once the geese all quit flying and once it was all over with, I don't know, I suppose they went someplace else. I don't know where they went. But it's just, reducing the limit down to 4 is just one method of maybe slowing what inevitably is probably going to happen anyway. If we have birds and we have birds and we have the conditions, they're not going to quit coming. It's not going to stop. I can just see it continuing to happen. And at what point do our residents, nobody hunts anymore? I'm looking for a quality hunt for the youth and the residents of Kansas. And we just didn't get it this year, unfortunately.
Did you have a statement, Tom?
Sure. So, Kansas is becoming more of a goose state. We're seeing more goose numbers on our midwinter survey and through our biweekly survey as well, and kind of getting be renowned as a goose state. And part of that, we are getting a lot of hunting pressure from commercial services, both in state and out of state, that are coming here. And it's a common problem or concern I have and get from the public regarding the pressure that they're consistently putting on those birds. A 4-bird bag limit, I don't think would be drastically enough to change hunters' behaviors. So the guide services are growing because there's a market for it. I think bag limits, like particularly when we looked at hunter satisfaction, when you start getting at 2 or 3 birds per bag, is that's when it changes hunter behavior. At 4 birds, I still think the commercial hunting pressure would be about equal.
Commissioner Spore, thank you, Tom. I appreciate you recognizing that there is issues, and I think that helps my cause. And my whole point is, I made this statement a couple meetings ago. I'd like to take the Canada goose season or limit to 3. But I said, well, I guess at this point I would settle for 4. And that's why I settled in on 4, in just an effort to help it. I appreciate you recognizing what I'm also seeing in Kansas. Thank you.
It's just not Western Kansas, it's throughout Kansas, but particularly in the eastern part of the state where geese are getting to be in more numbers throughout the year.
Okay, we have to move something along so that we can get our seasons open. This is a public hearing session. I support staff recommendations. What I'm going to hope that we can do is we can at least get the motion for staff recommendations to make moved and seconded. And at some point, Chris, if we want to put in an amendment, we have to have a motion and a second on the amendment. And but we need to get this ball rolling so we can get seasons set and get everything done, because I think generally everybody is more or less in agreement on that. But Commissioner Spore wants to have a 5 or 4 bird limit on dark geese. I don't think that's going to make any difference, and I'm going to propose that we stick with the 6, but I understand what he's saying. But to do that, we need to get the seasons on the table, and then in the logical outgrowth of discussion, we ask for an amendment. Is that right? And see whether the amendment passes.
We need to have a motion and a second to bring the recommendation before the commission. And then if there is an amendment, we can have a motion and a second on an amendment.
That's right. So I would like for somebody to bring the motion forward, and I need a motion and a second.
Commissioner Ryder, just for clarification, is the waterfowl season and the dark geese tied together, or it's listed separate in the briefing book? Is it separate? Is it a separate vote?
So
I didn't think so.
Yeah, so currently it'd be a singular vote unless there's motions to change if the recommendation. It's a consensus vote over the whole package.
Commissioner Ryder.
Yes.
Commissioner Ryder, I move to make the motion to move forward on 115, 18, 13. Is that correct?
No, that's a separate. So this doesn't have a KR assigned to it. This is just a consensus vote by the commission for adoption.
On seasons and bag limits.
Okay, Commissioner Ryder, I move to progress.
Could I have a second?
Commissioner Gefeller, I'll second.
Okay, now if Commissioner Spore wants to bring in his amendment, we would vote on the amendment before we vote on the motion that Aaron Ryder brought in. Is that right, Chris?
Chris Tymason, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Spore, I would like to amend the Canadian goose limit from 6 to 4.
Commissioner Sill, I'll second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we have an amendment. So now we need to work on the amendment. Is there discussion on the amendment?
Commissioner Gefeller, I'd like for Tom to explain the public survey information and give his thoughts about the change.
Sure. Let me share a slide here real quickly. So you can see the kind of the results were in 2014, we asked preferred bag limit of 3 to 8. Actually, the predominant one by a small margin was 8 geese, then followed by 6 geese. So we asked it kind of in a more simplified way in 2019. Again, these are large scale survey. They're not only asking the more ardent hunters, but also the kind of the general hunting community as well. And here we kind of used a different scale, a Likert scale of what their most preferred one being. Again, a 2.3 or kind of a moderately preferred was the 6 Canada goose limit. No, we harvest close to 80,000 Canada geese in the state each year. I think at the 6 opportunity, it provides a lot of opportunity. So we went and think in 2008 when we made that switch, or 2011 or 12. And it was kind of the same as the duck bag limit was kind of that, where again, we had the same concerns as Mr. Sporter thing about 8 birds being just too many, and maybe a hunter preference might be smaller. It's kind of, so we kind of matched it with the goose bag limit. You know, it's a lot of opportunity still. I would agree. A 6 Canada geese, large Canada geese is a lot of meat for one day, but so is some of our other things like deer or other things. I think this still remains, I wouldn't want to make this recommendation change without another large scale public survey to say that. As far as kind of, as I mentioned earlier, if we wanted to affect hunting attitudes or hunting number of hunters or commercializing hunters, you'd probably have to go to probably closer to a 2 bird bag limit on that issue.
Commissioner Gefeller again, Tom, are these residents you're surveying, or is it a combination of residents?
Right. No, they're completely resident. So we randomly select, I think both years around 25 or 12,500 residents. We get about 3,500 surveys back on that, 3,800 surveys.
And as far as numbers, the 6 bag limit, you're saying doesn't have an effect on Canada goose numbers?
Well, from 6 to 8, there's probably only a small harvest, small increase in harvest, because you think the times you go out, you know, times you get 1 or 2s more often than the times you get 6 to 8. So it's a small bag limit, but hunter harvest is very important for us for managing our resident Canada goose populations, not only here in Kansas, but as well as the Central Flyway. You know, we harvest about 17% of the resident Canada geese that are harvested out of North Dakota when they get forced down by winter weather, out of Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. They become, particularly like around the Wichita area, those areas are important for harvesting those birds. And in some states like Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, they have pretty high, you know, resident populations. They're probably over 200,000 in the Dakotas. Here in Kansas, our resident population is still relatively small, at about 18,000 birds.
Well, I guess I would say, Mr. Chairman, I mean, my thoughts at this point is I'm having trouble seeing how reducing the bag limit to 4 would fix the problem we've been talking about, and not to diminish the fact that there's a problem. There clearly is. But I would certainly hate to make a bunch of resident hunters upset with a change in the bag limit without having a lot of confidence it's going to have a meaningful effect on the other issues we're dealing with.
I tend to agree with Commissioner Gefeller. I think to deal with the problem that Troy talks about is going to take a lot different action and a lot in ways that we need to be careful if we do them. Is there any other discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
Mike? Yes.
Assistant Secretary Mike Miller. I just want to make another kind of an assurance to everyone. I was also involved with the committee and Tom when they were setting some of these recommendations. And, you know, I'm so impressed with the amount of data that they go through and they consider. And we've always maintained that we want to make decisions, data-driven decisions. And they have the exact concerns that Troy has. We want our hunters to have good hunts and good quality hunts. And so whether it's the season recommendations or the bag limit recommendations within the framework set by the Fish and Wildlife Service, the folks in this agency that are working on these recommendations are using the very best data that they have available to them. And they're trying to make the very best decisions they can for all the hunters that will be hunting. And from my old information days, I wonder what I would tell a hunter when he asked me, why did we go from 6 to 4? Most of our guys might only get to hunt 2 or 3 days a year. And on that one day when the geese are really flying, they may not have an opportunity to take, you know, a six bird limit or something like that. It would be a hard thing to explain to somebody. Thank you.
Any more discussion? Any discussion from the public?
Commissioner Sill, I do deeply appreciate the data and the science that goes into that, to those decisions. And I do value our biologists tremendously. But if we simply send a report to these hunters who are terribly frustrated and on the verge of leaving hunting, how are they going to respond to that? And again, perception is reality for these people. They may not have time or the interest in sitting down and listening to the science, because the reality is they got pushed out of the blind that morning and their personal experience outweighs the report you're going to hand them. So if this is not the solution to stop the potential loss of resident hunters, then what do we do? Some of the data about whether we were losing residents or not, there were places where there were some decreasing, some were staying stable. I recognize that, but why do we have to wait until the decline has started and we've lost those people? Because it's harder to reactivate them than it is to keep them. I don't want to wait to act until 5 years down the road, we say, wow, we've lost 13,000 waterfowl hunters. I wonder what happened. I am not comfortable waiting a year to start to make a few of the more significant changes. And I appreciate what Stuart brought. I think it's going to be helpful. I'm not quite sure it's enough given the tenor of the emails that we've been receiving.
Well, of course, I've received, I get that. And I've received emails from a couple more recently from non-resident hunters, some of which were non-resident landowners. There must be kind of a series of smoke signals or drums or something, because the non-resident public is aware of the discussions that are going on in Kansas. And, you know, this person makes a good reason for me to say he hunts only on private land. And for those people that don't hunt on public land, and I just don't know why we need to change the limits for everybody when we can maybe deal with somehow to keep them off public land. I don't know how you're going to stop the outfitters. They're slick, and I don't know how you're going to stop it. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Lauber. Brad Lovelace. I might offer a parallel circumstance. I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail, but recently we've been dealing for a few years with a pretty vociferous group of hunters and fishermen up around Milford Reservoir. And they contacted their legislators and presented their case that we were kind of presiding over a disaster up there in terms of the way we're managing our wildlife area. And these people were strong and they were convincing, and they said that it's very clear what the outcomes are up there. And so we stepped back and we said, we understand you guys feel very strongly that we're going in absolutely the wrong direction. But since we want to be based on good science, as opposed to taking just those few opinions that were very vocal, very strident, we said we'd like to do a survey. So we employed Fort Hays State and their center, highly respected group to do the survey. Well, they did. And the survey was very impressive because they reached out to people who had purchased licenses, and the results were very clear. We sat down with the people locally who felt so strongly we were going in the wrong direction, and the data were compelling. People were overwhelmingly in favor of the way we were managing that. And we didn't know what to expect, frankly, but they were very supportive of not total agreement. They had good advice. It has suggestions, but those were data that we could make decisions on. Those were scientific data. Those are not necessarily the people that you're getting emails from, right? You're getting a subset that's very vocal. And we know from our social media experience that these things tend to feed on themselves. I mean, it's not a coincidence that a lot of the responses sound similar. People talk to each other. So what I would encourage you to do is, we have survey data. It's a couple years old. We can do more surveys. I understand your sense of urgency when it comes to this, but we have to take the long view. And I think if we're changing regulations based on speculation about how it may affect, that goes against recommendations based on the biology of the species that we're charged to manage, based on the advice we're getting, the recommendations from our own resident hunters, I think that's a pretty steep hill to climb if we want to go against that.
Well, I appreciate that, Brad, but right now I think we're going to have to get this thing. We have a motion. We have a motion and a second on an amendment. And I think we can have some more discussion on the amendment, but I think we need to vote so we can move on. And is there any more discussion on this amendment? Warren?
Chairman, I just want to be clear that my vote on this amendment doesn't signal that I don't believe there's a problem that requires some action with a sense of urgency. I'm just not convinced that reducing the bag limit to 4 would really deal with the competition for space in these public lands. And I fear that we might run the risk of making a lot of our resident hunters upset, and it's even possible that we would find more days in the field from both resident and non-resident hunters if the bag limit were reduced.
I
Commissioner
understand.
Commissioner Sport, we've all discussed the over pressuring of our public lands due to non-residents. Tom has said that he agrees that there is a problem, and all I'm trying to do is just make a small step, and reducing the limit from 6 to 4 is just one small step. Come next year, I think we're probably going to have bigger problems than we have this year, but I'm just wanting to make one small step. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Well, I concur with Commissioner Gefeller. My no vote on this amendment does not mean I don't believe we don't have a problem, but I don't think this is the most effective way to solve it. If there's no other discussion, then I'm going to propose that we vote. Any more discussion? Anybody want to say anything more? Sheila? A yes vote is that you want it reduced to 4. and you want the amendment to pass, a no vote is you want to go back to staff recommendation. Sheila,
Commissioner Sporer?
Yes.
Okay, yes makes it stay at 6, right?
No.
No? No, okay, all right, I'm sorry.
yes,
Okay,
yes makes it
got
go
it.
to 4.
Go to 4, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, Commissioner Sill,
No.
Commissioner Ryder?
Yes to 4.
Okay. Commissioner Gefeller,
No.
Commissioner Cross,
No.
Commissioner Lauber.
No.
The amendment failed 2 to 4.
All right. Now we have the original motion on the table to go with staff recommendation. Is there more discussion on that?
I would, Commissioner Spore, you know, I'm not going to do it, but I would make a suggestion that somebody make an amendment that we take out non-residents for Youth and Veterans Day, not allow them to participate. Thank you. I'm going to let somebody else in the commission take that on if they want to take it on. I would vote in favor of not allowing non-residents to participate in Youth or Veterans Day. Thank you.
Commissioner Sill. If I remember correctly, at last meeting, there was some discussion about splitting the weekend, potentially being youth only on Saturday, youth and veterans on Sunday, but we've had no discussion of that this meeting. Was that something that's just in my imagination, or was that an item of discussion? Tom?
So it was brought up at last meeting, and as well as I covered it in one of the slides here of those different options, such as splitting the weekends, having a Saturday youth only and Sunday. And the staff recommendation was to keep as is, to work with public lands to address crowding on those issues. We thought the reduction of opportunities on those wildlife areas that aren't having overlap, or particularly even more so on those private lands, to not deny those opportunities or loss of the hunting days for those active military veterans where they're not impacting the youth waterfall events. I do think going through some of the youth marshes and designating more youth marshes is a better alternative for this. And then splitting out the weekends is how it affects the other season date setting, that it gets a lot more complicated.
Okay. Chris, this question's for you, Commissioner Sill again. Chris, this question is probably for you. Can you set it up to be residents only on state-owned lands, publicly owned lands, and non-residents or residents on private lands, or is that out of the question?
This is Chris Tymason. I've looked at this issue in relation to residency, and I would advise against that. Because we're broadcasting, I believe there is some jeopardy there potentially in some of those proposals. And so my advice would be to stick with what the department recommendation is.
There's
One of the
jeopardy, Commissioner Sill, there's jeopardy in public land, private land delineation, or jeopardy in residency restrictions, period.
Probably the perception of discriminating against veterans. If we're going to have it in some areas and not others, that's the reason I like the idea of the public lands just having a lot of pools, a lot of the available access being youth only, to where it causes the veterans not to compete with youth, but to go to private lands. That I think we're okay with. Chris, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
I just think that I would prefer not to lay out a strategy for somebody to file suit against us over the internet. So my advice would be to stick with what we have.
Okay, I have one last question, Commissioner Still. Where it describes in the briefing book, it says veterans is described, blah, 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 members of the armed forces, National Guard, blah, blah, blah. All hunters must possess a federal migratory bird hunting and conservation stamp. It doesn't say anything about a state stamp right there, but do we need an amendment to include in that description evidence of active duty or veteran status via one of those 8 documents that Tom has listed? Does that require an amendment to include that verbiage along with the requirements for stamps?
So all of them are covered under the Federal Register through our season selection letter. So I'll let Chris answer, but in my opinion, it's covered through the Federal Register of what's required and what is required for proper ID for youth or for veterans and active military.
This is Chris Timus, and I'd concur with Tom's assessment on that. We transmit that it's a veteran season, and in the frameworks it allows those 8 pieces of identification.
And so for Commissioner Self, for clarity, in any documentation we print, we could include that so that veterans now come prepared, since last year that was not required to be proven. We could make that clear to them so that they do come prepared, have the documentation they need. Is that correct?
Brad, Secretary Lovelace, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Brad Lovelace. We might refer to Colonel Kaiser. He and I were just having this conversation that you all are talking about the other day about his perspective on how his officers will do when it comes to checking, and about the clarity that veterans have in regard to proof of their status. Colonel, you want to go ahead?
Well, I was talking to a military member here recently, and I was told that of 3 forms of ID, either their active duty card, their a driver's license that says veterans on it, that you get from Department of Revenue, or there's an ID that veterans can get through the Veterans Administration for free with their ID. And there's a link on the VA website. They can apply and get that. Doesn't cost them anything. And that's what I was told at Fort Bragg, that those are the 3 IDs that they accept to get on the base. I don't know about the other 5 that are listed, but those are the ones that I was told.
Colonel Brad Lovelace again. Colonel, just to be clear, a point you made to me is veterans have to show their status all the time. This is a pretty frequent thing. And so they expect to routinely have to prove that, correct?
Correct.
Is there any more discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Miller, just to respond to Commissioner Sill, we can absolutely include those requirements in the hunting regs under the season for youth and veterans and active military. So it would be clear to them when they saw that in the regs that would be required.
I can share a press release that we have that listed these out, and also the state requirements. And I think I've shared with this after the previous commission meeting, the press release.
Commissioner Sill, I'm struggling with, I still have concerns with Commissioner Sporer that it be a resident only weekend, given some of the abuses that did happen last year and the lack of checking. My wonderings are, or ponderings are, that if we enforce the proof of veteran status, perhaps that cuts down enough on some of the tag alongs, that then we don't have to have the enforcement of residents or the enforcement of resident status. And so I guess if I am going to step away from my concerns shared with Commissioner Sporer about making it a resident only weekend, then I want some pretty strong assurances that we're going to enforce that it's residents only and not 6 of their buddies tagging along with them.
This is Gerald here. I'm assuming that Colonel Kaiser hears this and can direct his people that this is an item of concern, and so maybe a little more priority. We have a very limited number of COs out there anyway, but we could do the best we can to ramp up enforcement. I guess I didn't realize that it was a problem from people trying to pretend they're veterans and not really being one, but maybe that's a bigger problem than I thought. I want to get back to the motion on the table. We have a motion that's been moved and seconded. We've had a lot of discussion. We've had an amendment that didn't pass, but I'd like to go ahead and get this brought forward.
Mr. Chairman, of course, I'd like to make an amendment for the Southeast Zone for November 13th to January 2nd and January 8th to the 30th of January. Like I stated before, I won't go into all the detail like I did last time because I've hit it several times, but I think it's best for youth seasons with a lot of warm days in the early seasons. And I think this gives a better range of hunting opportunities with the shallow marsh early and then dry field later on, and big water and river hunting later on as well. And looking at the Southeast Zone and what the purpose of this zone is, to have that late season and big picture, looking at, reducing as it's written or recommended, having 2 weeks closed throughout the season across the entire state. I'd like to at least reduce that to 1 week there, 5 days where it wouldn't be, it'd be longer if it as recommended. So I'd like to reduce that, and so that way we give more opportunity for hunters across the zones, across the state, starting in October, and then moving across the state. So I think that's really important. And I do a lot of talking with a lot of people, and I try to keep my pulse on the region. A lot of different events and things of that nature. And this is what I consistently hear. And I know Tom and his group, they do a lot of this as well. But being down here and talking with lots of people, that's what I hear. And so that's what I'd like to amend the season dates to.
Are you moving an amendment?
Yeah, I'm moving an amendment for the Southeast Zone to November 13th to January 2nd. And then
I disagree with you, but we'll have that discussion when you get a second, if you get a second.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Commissioner Sporer.
When you say down there, that's the item that I hear mostly the complaints about is the Southeast Zone is primarily dedicated to the interests of those that hunt around the Osho. And that the people that hunt the early migrants get, by the time the people down there are hunting, the rest of the Southeast Zone is froze up. And I strongly think that we've opened it later and later, and I think it should be opened a week earlier in the last week of October. And I think that hunter preferences, and Tom, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of desire and a lot of hunter days in those early parts. there's a lot of birds that come through there, and not necessarily the big mallard numbers, but I think that having it the first weekend in November is absolutely plenty of compromise. And the early migrant hunters in the southeast zone has been shorted a week for quite a while, and I don't think it's fair. So,
Commissioner Spohr, testament to what's happening in the state of Kansas with all the overhunting on public lands. The reason for all of our problems and all the discussions that we've had is called a green-headed duck. And that's causing most of the challenges we have today. And the reason for moving that southeast zone 1 week ahead, you lose a week of hunting in November, but you gain a week in January. And that's when the green-headed ducks are down there.
unless you don't have an ice eater and everything's frozen up.
It just depends on the year, but what Commissioner Ryder is asking for is the exact same season that we voted on last year. Is that not correct, Commissioner Ryder?
Yeah, that's correct.
That is correct.
Days,
I thought it
one
was
day sooner actually than it was last year, but
yeah, I think it is the same that we voted, and staff recommendation is aware of that and still comes back based on hunter preferences and surveys with another date, but I only get one vote.
But Commissioner,
Tom, do you have anything to add?
I need a clarification. They're changing the dates from what to what?
Taking a week away from the front end of the southeast zone.
So the staff recommendation, if I'm reading it right, is November 6th to November or January 2nd, and then January 15 to January 30. Is that
Yes,
staff?
that's staff recommendation, but the amendment is to take a week away in November and move it to January.
What does that mean? Start a week later and then
Yes,
not have the break in January?
not have as much of a break.
Okay. And
Ryder, it reduces the length of time across the state in which no hunting, no waterfowl, or excuse me, no duck hunting is throughout the state for those in January.
That's an ancillary benefit. The real benefit is for the people that hunt in one small area that has a tremendous amount of ducks in the southeast zone. And it's not, those people don't hunt around the state. So I think it's basically an effort to have the mallard hunters in one small area in the southeast zone to have more opportunity at the expense of other hunters in the more broad southeast zone.
well, would that exacerbate the overcrowding problem? Is it going to attract people, more people to the zone for that week?
I mean, in January?
Yeah, I guess I'm not clear on it.
I think this is another issue. This is an issue of the people in that area want more of the ducks. Tom, am I correct as far as the surveys and more desire to have more early season?
So if I could get another week to the season, this is where I would add it, would be to correct the southeast zone. The hunters are pretty divided on this issue. What we do know is that ducks are predominantly moving through November. And that includes mallards. Banding data, satellite data prove that they are showing up usually the first part of November, shortly after Veterans Day. If we're truly concerned about R3 or reactivation and retaining those moderate hunters, it is those November days. That's when we see the peak harvest, peak participation in those days for those areas on both public and private land. But there is a strong sentiment, and again, that those mallards, again, particularly those that are hunting Flooded corn, where those mallards are start seeking a different food source during January. The hunting really attracts them the later part of January. So with the amendment, what you're truly doing, or you're trading November days for January days, as staff proposed, it would give 25 days in November and 18 days in January, where it would flip-flop that with the proposed recommendation. Sometime during that week, 2 weeks in January, you're going to be froze 4 or 5 days. And when it opens, it will be fairly good. But if, there's in flying surveys in early November in that part of the state, I'm usually seeing more than a week of ice. I'm seeing low hunter activity when we do have those ice conditions down there. It's a hunter preference issue that we've been struggling with since we created the Southeast Zone. Last year's recommendation was to be the first Saturday, but again, the previous 3 years staff recommendation was to be the second Saturday. Kind of to take out that bias is why we kind of chose that November 8th day, the Saturday closest that November 8th, to kind of remove that bias. It will give different variations of how many days in even some years where there'd be actually more days in January than there will be in November. So that's kind of the compromise we come up with, is that November 8th, Saturday closest date.
Any more discussion on the amendment, Mike?
One last comment regarding that hunters are extremely mobile and they do chase seasons. So we get the Southeast zones that come out to the early zone and vice versa. You get the early zone season. So it does add hunting pressure to those zones with people chasing when one part of the state's closed versus another.
Assistant Secretary Miller.
Yeah, Mike Miller. I just wanted to give another perspective that I heard from the staff at the Neosho Wildlife Area that may or may not resonate. It did with me. And they felt like the later opener is causing a loss of what they call the average Joe duck hunter, where we might call it the casual duck hunter, the guy that has some waders and a bag of decoys and just wants to walk in and hunt. He doesn't have a surface drive. He doesn't have a 17-foot duck boat, where those guys can hunt when there's a 1/4 inch of ice or whatever on it, where the average guy doesn't. They feel like they're seeing fewer and fewer of those guys as we go later and later in the season. And they're very concerned about it. They're pretty passionate about that loss of that average or that casual duck hunter with this later opener. And I felt like, Tom's Saturday closest to November 8th was a pretty decent compromise, because, some days it'll be early like this year, and like in 2023, it'll open later. It kind of alternates from year to year on the number of days in January and the number of days in November. It is a nice compromise, but there is some concern that we're catering to folks that do have either better equipment or, they have leases or they own land and they can hunt later in the year when the average guy can't. So that was a perspective I gained listening to some of the waterfowl managers talk.
Any more discussion?
All right, Commissioner Ryder, my rebuttal, I guess maybe to that is that it seems to me like we're catering everything to those state areas. And a lot of people, of course, probably maybe even a majority, don't necessarily hunt on those wetland managed areas. Lots of opportunity outside of those things. And so, and I'm not saying anything negative or saying that those are invalid points or invalid opinions. Of course not. But I think that I don't want to. Some people think that I'm catering to a particular group, but on the flip side, I would say the argument against that would be catering to a different group as well. And I think the peak days, if you look at any type of season, you look at dove season or some of the other seasons, you're going to have your first days be your peak days. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, Commissioner Spohr here. I just got a message from one of the constituents down there in Southeast Kansas to answer Warren's question about public and private. This constituent's comment was it really doesn't matter on public lands because the non-residents got it full up. There's no place to hunt, and the residents have to go to private land to get any hunting done. So that's kind of sums that up in Southeast Kansas. Thank you.
What Assistant Secretary Miller's comments, well, he said it a little more elegantly than I did, pretty much parallel with the sentiment that I'm hearing from, I suppose, the average Joe with waders and a few decoys. So I think we beat this to death. We have this every year. Is there any more discussion from any commissioner or public who hasn't said anything yet?
Is this just on this amendment now?
Right now, we're just on this amendment to change the season dates away from what staff recommended. All right, Sheila, a yes vote means you want to change the season away from staff recommendation. A no vote, you vote for staff recommendation.
Commissioner Spore,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
No.
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
No.
Commissioner Cross,
No.
Commissioner Lauber.
No.
Failed 2-4.
All right, let's go back to the original motion then. Do we have any more amendments?
Do I need to make an amendment to have more discussion on the
No,
resident, on the residency
you can have
issue?
more discussion.
I need a little bit more clarification. If I were to make an amendment that it be a resident season only, that it included lifetime license holders, and that it included military, whatever that definition is, to include those who are stationed here, not just Kansas residents. I don't know this. I don't have the exact wording for that. But to include lifetime license holders, vets, active military, and youth residents. I don't understand why we can have resident only antelope, we can have resident only elk, but we can't have one resident only weekend for ducks. Can somebody help me understand that?
Chairman,
Part of
Chris,
it may be because, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
yes, this is a complicated constitutional issue, and there is litigation that has occurred since the 1970s up through the mid 2000s, in which the department was part of, and then there is some unsettled litigation potentially there. I would prefer that we not have an in-depth discussion about litigation strategies, thereby opening up the commission and the department to litigation. I will tell you that I believe that if you do make the youth and veteran season resident only, I believe it's unlawful.
But other species, it's okay.
No, we have opportunity for elk and antelope.
And
There is non-resident
one is a
opportunity.
is a federally monitored species and the other is not.
That's not, I appreciate
That
that.
may not be a problem.
Mr. Chairman, but there is non-resident opportunity in both of those species.
But there would be non-resident opportunity for ducks the remainder of the season. I'm sorry, I really have to, I am not trying to make a mess, Chris. I'm really not. But I'm struggling with making a wise decision that honors the resident and honors in Kansas, that honors your department staff, that honors your professional knowledge and opinion, and not having a solid grasp on the issue yet. So my apologies across the board for not quite catching this. But I'm trying to make a decision with as much integrity as I possibly can, and I don't want to make a stupid one.
Well, Lauren, Gerald here, is the youth and veterans hunt that big a deal? I don't think that's what Troy's so concerned about. He's concerned about kind of season long. And is there that big an issue with the youth, I got the emails and I understand it, but can't we deal with that through most of our public lands with having youth-only waters?
We might, but because it is a relatively small portion of hunters, the way you've described, I guess the most honest answer is, I don't know, maybe that would take care of it. At the same time, it's an opportunity to take a step and see, does this make a difference? You know, last year, when we had to, because of COVID, cut out the non-resident turkey hunters, resident permits jumped by over 10%. I can't just blow that off and say, well, they were all off work so they could hunt. Maybe, but maybe knowing that that competition wasn't there allowed them to go out. And so it's one small step to stop that bleeding without taking a big chop at something that we don't really want to do right now.
I remember Archie Bunker used to say, Edith has supper at 6, whether it's ready or not. And I don't really want to jump into this until we really think about it a little more. I'm just not comfortable with doing anything. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Brad Lovelace. I think Commissioner Sill, you're right. We did have a non-resident increase, but we saw increases in a lot of things with COVID, fishing permits, all kinds of things increased as a result of that. So I don't know how to separate those data and know what to attribute those to. The important thing, if you remember back to Stewart's remarks, we explicitly talked, and Assistant Secretary Miller alluded to this too, we specifically talked to those public land managers and said, was there a conflict there? Because we were concerned, same thing you guys are, about conflicts between the veterans. And we talked about the issue of maybe we weren't challenging the veterans to produce proof last year, and ways we can correct that this year to make sure that's not an issue. Secondly, were they impinging on the youth that we all are prioritizing and the experience that they had that weekend? And so the public land managers responded by designating areas, you know, and Stuart mentioned those across the state. And then also talking about, we also asked explicitly, every one of those managers, when they talked about those areas, evaluated that youth veteran weekend and how it worked, and were there conflicts, and how do we minimize it? And the places where we perceived there might have been, that's where they made adjustments. In others, like I remember specifically Mayor Zine, he talked about exactly how the weekend went and how smooth it was, worked out, and how high the satisfaction was. So I think I really appreciate everybody's focus on that, because we don't want to anybody, we want to make it a quality experience for both, and especially we don't want to undermine our efforts to encourage youth and help them have a great experience. And I think with the changes that were made that Stuart mentioned that you all voted on earlier, I think we're going down that road. Not that it's a perfect solution. We'll be evaluating it again next year, getting the same feedback and continue to make adjustments.
Yeah. Well, I understand. I would like to go ahead and get this passed, and so we can move on to one other item of business we have. This is not going to go away, and I'm not sure it needs to go away, but I hate to hold this up anymore because I just don't know. I pay attention when legal counsel says he doesn't advise it without wavering. I do pay attention to that. I'd like to go ahead and call for the question so we can get this one out of there, out of the queue. And, you know, if you don't feel comfortable voting for these season dates, Lauren, because your other items aren't addressed, I get it, but I really hate to hold this up.
I understand, and that's not my goal at all.
I know, and I hear lots of particularly you and I hear more complaints about non-resident deer than you and I do non-resident waterfowl probably, but we're getting a lot of both. Sheila, I'm going to propose, unless anybody has any more things they want to say, I'm going to propose that we call the question.
Okay.
And what we're voting on, if those of you who can't remember, is we've had two motions that failed, and we're voting on staff recommendations. Go ahead, Sheila.
Commissioner Sporter,
No.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Ryder,
No.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber.
Yes.
Pass 4-2.
We have one more item in public hearing.
Sure, and this is a short housekeeping item. So KR 115-18-13 defines dark goose species, establish goose harvest management units, and a hunter permit system for dark geese in those units, as well as provided season length, daily bag limit, and shooting hours in those units. These conservation measures were implemented in the early 1990s to address dwindling migrant goose stocks in eastern Kansas. However, growing Canada goose stocks through the 2000s, goose management has greatly changed from restrictive to liberal strategies. In 2008, Kansas adopted a single statewide season for dark geese. As such, there's no longer a need to maintain KAR 115-18-13. If harvests need to be restricted to alternative measures, as well as alternative unit boundaries would likely be defined. KAR 115-18 is a vestige of past goose management, and staff recommends revoking the regulation.
Okay, any questions? Any discussion? Can I have a motion we approve?
I'll move. Gefeller.
Can I have a second?
Still, yes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we eliminate the revoke. What, I don't have the number, whatever the number was. Any more discussion? Okay, Sheila?
Commissioner Sporter,
Yes.
Commissioner Sill,
Yes.
Commissioner Ryder,
Yes.
Commissioner Gefeller,
Yes.
Commissioner Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber.
Yes.
Pass 6-0.
Okay, that concludes the business we have for this evening. Now, on regard to the items that took so much time, do we have kind of an understanding of where staff is going to go on? Stuart, are you here still? To continue to look at these matters?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Stuart Schrog again. And I might mention too that the recommendations that were presented tonight don't necessarily paint the entire picture. We're working on some other things, and Byron Walker Wildlife Area is a prime example. It is a pretty heavily used waterfowl area because of some marsh development we've made there. We're looking at developing an entire half section designated to youth only for all game species, to include building a wetland there too. So there's a big picture, a planning phase going on right now that will encompass a lot of the concerns that you have, and we'll continue to look implementing more youth marches for that season specifically. But I just wanted to mention that there are other things that are being discussed and looked at that I think will help with this discussion and the concerns that you have.
Yeah, Commissioner Sell, it's hard to make wise year-to-year decisions without some of that long-term view in perspective, knowing that you can't hand us a documented, this is the way it's going to be for the next 5 years or 10 years. I understand that. But if we don't know some of that planning, we have to make a decision for 1 year based on that information only, without the long-term view and planning. And that feels really unwise sometimes. And I think it plays into a lot of what Commissioner Sporer is saying, is we've got to do something. I firmly believe there's a problem. And I think that there's, like I've said, there's demonstrated trends in other areas that this is mirroring in somewhat, and we're flat out reluctant to address some of those issues. And without long-term planning in view, it's difficult to make wise decisions. So if there's ways that you can kind of lay out some of those plans and hopes and dreams, boy, that would be an encouragement to me and aid some of my decision making. My other question is it possible to start this process like one meeting earlier next year? If we have to hammer out some of these more complex issues, perhaps one additional month or one meeting might help. I don't know. I don't need an answer right now. Just a thought.
I think that's a good idea. To have more workshop session. Might put a little more pressure on staff, but I think it'd give us more time.
This is Commissioner Sporer. I've certainly tried to address the overcrowding of public hunting for waterfowl in this meeting, and the lack of a quality hunt experience. I feel like we didn't get anything. I guess we slowed some people down with a no wait zone and couldn't let them start till 5 o'clock. I think that's pretty small. I've got a suggestion for the next meeting. The state of Kansas publicizes waterfowl counts weekly, bi-weekly. Some areas are good, some are bad. Area managers count them in different ways, and you kind of learn which is good and which is bad. I would like to stop the counting. I've done a little research, areas, states, nobody's counting anymore. Nebraska, Missouri, North and South Dakota, Colorado, they don't count. Oklahoma's not counting. They only give brief scenarios of what the conditions of the area is. And I guess I'll leave that up to staff recommendations to come back next time and next meeting and tell me that that's probably not a good idea.
Brad.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman Law, Brad Lovelace. I think that's a great idea, Commissioner Sporer. We can request that be a discussion item, and we can use the information collected from those other states, see what they're doing, get information from our staff, and then maybe, I don't know if we have any survey data that will give us a clue as to how valuable those are to residents or non-residents, either one. But we are glad to pursue that if that's the wishes of the commission. We would love to take that up next time and gather data on that and share that with you.
Thank you, Brad.
That sure, Commissioner Capella, that sure seems like it could stop some of the chasing around from guides and maybe even out-of-state people if they're just chasing numbers. Maybe they got to do a little more work.
Let's have that for a discussion item.
Okay.
Any other questions for tonight? Sheila, do we have all the meetings scheduled? Now, we have a meeting scheduled in Wichita. Are we going to have a meeting live this next time, or do we know yet?
I have the location set, but you need to tell us whether.
Well, this works pretty well, but there are also benefits to doing it the other way as well. What I'm going to do is I'd like to have Secretary Lovelace confer with his group and any state guidance, and then sooner than later get back and we'll have a discussion on it.
Yeah, Commissioner Ryder, if at all possible, I'd like to get to back to in-person public meetings, maybe do a hybrid with the online as well, because I do think it's beneficial, but I would like to get back to having on-location meetings if we can. Thank you.
Commissioner Spore, I agree with Commissioner Ryder.
Commissioner Sill, I concur.
I'd throw my hat in there too, except at June meeting, I have a particular conflict where I would like to be able to have a hybrid, because I'll have to video in on that one.
And I've been vaccinated. I can go either way. I just think we get a tremendous amount of participation by having it this way. So there you have it.
What is the date on that June meeting?
Let me read them all to you. Would you want me to do that?
Sure, the next couple at least.
Okay, the June meeting is the 17th. And right now it's scheduled for Wichita at the Great Plains Nature Center. And that one does change to 1 o'clock.
Right. That's the first meeting back at 1.
Right. And then it is August 5th after that. And we're going to Kansas City to the James P. Davis Hall. That's at Wyandotte County Lake. And we need to thank Emmerich for that one. And then after that, it's September 23rd. That's Beloit at the Rolling Hills Electric Cooperative with a tour of Ringneck Ranch. And the last one we have set right now is November 18th in Oakley at the Buffalo Bill Cultural Center.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Chris, yes.
If we could set January to help us plan, that would be by the time, because by the time we get to June, it'll be pushing deadlines. It would either be January 6th or January 13th.
Let's do the 13th.
Any preference for where?
When's the last time we've had one in Emporia?
Couple years, probably. Maybe 4 years.
Want to do that?
We can do that, or we can go south. We haven't been south. Like southeast Kansas or.
Like Iola?
Yeah.
No, we were there a year.
We were there at Iola, but.
Let's go to Emporia.
Okay. Okay, so January 13th, Emporia.
Is there any other items to come before the group tonight? Been a long spirited meeting. I guess
Mr.
we'll
Chairman?
be in touch. Huh?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Miller, I just wanted to add, I was going to do this at the end of the afternoon session. Commissioner Gefeller had asked about the pronghorn or the antelope permits and if we issued them all. We receive about 1,000 applications every year for the little over 200 permits we have. So that's why it takes 5 preference points in some of those units. So there's high demand for those.
Good, thanks.
Okay. Meeting's adjourned.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everybody.